Nanyosha mikono yangu juu, naisifu nchi yangu maarufu. Nanyosha mikono yangu juu, naisifu nchi yangu maarufu. Hello, hello Tanzania. Hello, hello.
So, I'm very glad, David, that finally we were able to have you at the hub, at the Smart Partners Hub. And as it happened, actually, after a number of hours having spent with you, it looked like you were with us for quite a number of years. It just didn't happen. And one of our networkers, Professor Luke Yoyo, a bit earlier on this year, and we were talking about technology, particular lessons. So we're talking about particularly how to compare, transfer or learn whatever was discussed in Tanzania at the Dar es Salaam dialogue in relation to taking forward to South Africa. So we were quite anxious about the fact that we don't have some way of reflecting, or somebody to have reflected in a different perspective than all of ourselves who are part of it. So he said, no, but I know David. And don't you know David? Well, I said, I don't know David. They said, okay, look him up. So look him up at the paper. So now, although we haven't met you, we already yet, until today, quite a lot of smart partners know about your paper, the learning from abroad, the role of policy transfer in contemporary policy making. The central bank governors came here at the end of July. They didn't talk about you, but they talk about the concepts you put there. And it's very good to have you today, and particularly after a few hours to realize that you actually can be, and you're willing to be part of our group as a great resource. And and I'm glad that John is here, John Carter, who kind of being a pragmatic private sector, I usually will temper down our academic reflections if we were to go too much into that. David, you are Professor David Dolowitz in Liverpool.
Yes.
Could you say a little bit about what is it that you're teaching and you're researching, and where are you from? Just quickly, but mainly about smart partnership after that.
Well, very quickly, I'm originally from the United States, and I came to Britain many, many years ago, and I teach.
It cannot be too many years ago. You're quite young. I mean, so not many, many years.
Well, over 20.
Over 20 you came here.
Yeah.
Your background is...
Yeah, my background is really teaching comparative, or my research and teaching is comparative governments and politics and policy making. And so I spend a lot of time looking at how theoretically or models of the state and political theory links to policy making in different forms. So a lot of the time I will spend teaching about how a particular policy reflects power structures based upon a given political theory. And that has emerged and led to my interest in how governments engage in or communicate with each other in order to develop new policies or new programs.
So within the government,
Yeah.
that's just how people
Yeah.
communicate with each
Yeah.
other to make new
Yeah.
policies and
Yeah.
so on.
In terms of my research, I've covered many areas. I've looked at the development of welfare state policies based around the movement of policies and ideas around basically between Britain and the United States, and then some of the Anglophile nations. I've also looked at how policies have or don't really move well in terms of stormwater management and the implementation of low-impact technologies, particularly in the ways in which what appear to be used in Europe are very different from the technologies that are used in the United States, even though they're trying to address similar problems. And the United States, at least at the local and regional level, appear to be very reluctant to adapt to or learn from European models at this point in time. Not that they're not interested, but they're not using information.
They're not able to.
They're not able to, is one of the ways, is a good way to describe that.
But not able to in what way? That it's a mental block?
There are cultural impediments to learning.
They're not invented here attitude?
There are definitely cultural, we know what works for us.
Yeah.
There's also a lot of misunderstanding. They believe legal regulations and planning regulations are so different that they cannot be overcome. There's even misunderstandings of, as it comes right down to it, even base information of what is the temperature like or what are the weather conditions like within one nation or another. So if you tell one country, if you tell one region that rain barrels are very popular and they're very usable on in ultra-urban environments, you'll get policymakers say, well, we can't possibly do that here because it gets cold in the winter, without any real understanding of how the rain barrel concept operates.
But we were discussing about a little bit about CPTM has as a base
Yeah.
a Commonwealth framework, meaning countries all over with some commonalities. But the federal, the US is
Yeah.
also federal.
Yeah.
So law is geographically also all over the place,
Yeah.
talking about weather.
Yeah. Yeah.
There is also some common commonality.
There are commonalities, so you often see when learning occurs or movement of ideas occurs in the United States anyway, you do see a lot from within states. So one local unit looking to another local unit within a state.
Within a state.
Yeah, or you see competition. So like Chicago will give ideas to Philadelphia. So
within that state.
no, within different
Sorry,
states.
within
Two different states, but
yes.
because of the metropolitan nature
Yes.
of them and the size of them, they see themselves as,
Yeah.
as adaptable. So there is definitely the commonality with the Commonwealth, which would be similar.
Yes.
In that there is a base structure, which makes movement possible.
Possible.
But then you see the structures on top of those base that start to disaggregate the possibilities.
Diverge,
Yeah, all of a sudden. And so you don't, what you'll see is a lot of looking, but not necessarily a lot of borrowing. Or you'll see a lot of looking without knowledge adaptation. Or even development of enough knowledge to wisely understand what you're looking at in a lot of ways.
You see, this is.
And part of that led to a third strand of research I've been following, which is how do you use electronic resources wisely for gathering research rather than just gathering information.
Including the open source.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Would be good, therefore, to talk a little bit about this ability of learning if you have a common.
Yeah.
And which is not only in our context the CPTM, the Commonwealth bit, but is also within the smart partnership movement. It is a smart partnership ethos and the practice as another commonality. So the question was, and then of course there is the hybrid way of communicating, electronic and otherwise. So does that make it easier? So there are the two things that are very, very, very important for the group when they come here at the beginning of December. Because there is a CPTM cooperative framework, smart partnership. So can one learn from one another?
I think you can learn within one another, but learning takes a long time. It's not something that happens overnight. And I also do not think that if you're trying to learn how to develop a system, that's something that I mean, because it's not something you can't take someone's system. You have to learn how to fit it into the existing cultural tactic.
Yeah.
You have to fit it into existing legal structures. I mean, there's so much you have to sort of unpick
Yeah.
to then to attach that new knowledge into it, or that new information into it. So knowledge sort of grows. It's sort of
That's right.
it's something that grows, and you have to have the proper environments in some ways for that to happen.
You see, that's why, in fact, in our case, if you take the preoccupation in Namibia, or the preoccupation of the smart partners, or in Malaysia, or in most of the countries where we are there for so many years, it is so many years because at a point of time there is a realization you can learn something, but it takes long time. You can't just do it.
Yeah, that's the point. I mean, one of the
that's
things.
very important.
One of the things you notice is that people come for the first time to a dialogue, and in many cases from different countries saying, but how's that going to work? Because we have this at home, or we have that. And sometimes they're wise enough to know that. Other times they don't. And they go wandering off, carrying it there, and oops, it doesn't quite fit.
But it's also the idea of taking time.
The iterations are very important, particularly what you refer to as they learned it didn't work. So they stopped.
Yeah.
Or they made the adjustments necessary.
Right.
And sometimes you'll see situations where adjustments aren't made, that they just carry on
And it gets,
a bad track.
and it gets worse and
Yeah.
worse. And then they give up and say, well, it
Yeah.
wasn't going to work anyway, which is, of course, a problem.
But you see, the other thing is that it's not a one-off
No.
exposure,
No.
because you improve all the time so it's not a
That's-
learning and going on.
Yeah.
You ongoingly feed in.
That's part of the problem with reliance on technology
practices.
only.
Ah.
In that if you look at technology only, or an example would be what I refer to as dum-dum points. Is
Yeah.
going to a bullet point PowerPoint presentation,
That's it.
because basically you're getting a one shot. Oh, I've learned everything I need to know about how to do this. I've just seen it.
Yeah.
And then you go away and you present that exact same PowerPoint to somebody else and they say, oh, this looks really simple, let's do it. Well, you haven't learned anything.
No.
What you've done is you've moved
Excellent.
a range of information from one place to another without going through the processes that are actually needed to learn from those processes.
See, that's why we banned the PowerPoint.
Mm.
But then something else needs to come in
Yes.
to make you realize that you are questioning and learning, and you kind of so it's a very we call it smart partnership. Let's talk frankly and informally about what it is off the record, but and then there is an ongoing coaching, nurturing. I don't know, what do you call it, because it's not coaching.
It always has to be. It almost have to
What is
be
it?
a curiosity, almost. Because
It is.
there has to be an
Very,
element
very,
of
very,
curiosity.
very good. You quite about
An
evolve.
element of interest first, that
Yeah.
this might be good for us, but
Yeah.
how would it work? What do we need
Yeah.
to do? And
Okay.
how
Yeah.
can we play this?
Yeah.
You see, there was this best practice, and right from the beginning, the best practice in our became a banned word.
Yeah,
or
it should
words.
be.
Yeah, but then you see, there are some situations which look like they work.
Yeah.
Yeah, like we were discussing a bit before, and that becomes a best practice. And you say, why shouldn't I expose myself to a best practice? And even if that might be a best practice becoming a situations, it cannot be transferred.
Yeah.
And it's probably a practice,
Yeah.
but it's not a best practice.
What
because
is
it
maybe a
evolves.
best practice within that nation?
It's just,
But it doesn't, and often best practices are based upon benchmarking, and
Yeah.
often benchmarking is really a horrible exercise.
absolutely, absolutely. Well, we haven't been doing that too.
Yeah, so
Yeah.
often what they say, often the problem with learning now is that it's based around bad fixes almost, in the
It's-
sense that
that's
you've
it,
got
that's it.
best practices based upon benchmarks. The benchmarks aren't appropriate or not necessarily the same for each time they're benchmarking, and I mean, it's a long cycle. It's a circular process, excuse me.
Yes, yes, in a
And
way. Yeah.
another problem that I think that is involved with learning is that it takes time to learn, but when you're talking about policy, sometimes policy makers don't have the time to learn. They don't.
No, that's another.
And they don't understand the implications.
Exactly. So what's being done is you look, you say, good, it's a great benchmark, it's a best practice, I can take it, use it, and then it's almost you have to clean up
Then you reject
afterwards.
it. So, or one another. So that is where this smart partnership also working together.
What's good about the
And
smart
trusting.
partnership working together is that you also have different types and ways in which learning can occur. So
Yeah.
you're not reliant on a single model of learning,
That's it.
which is also very important, is that you've got different nodes almost of learning, so that even if a partner comes to one activity or engages in one type of activity and doesn't see the learning
That's
potential,
it. That's
there is a way in which they can shift to another, or they might become involved in another where the learning actually does make sense. You're both correct. I think you're both saying similar things right
From a
now.
different
And that
angle.
is that for smart partnerships to work, there has to be curiosity on both sides, and there also has to be I want to learn from this person for our mutual
That's
advancement,
Okay.
not for my own advancement.
Only,
Because then you set yourself up into competition.
that's it.
And I think one of the issues that you have with, and I think it's an important aspect of the smart partnership, is bringing together businesses, governments, and academics, etc., is that each businesses don't have necessarily the same interests as a government, nor do they have the same responsibilities as a government. So a government has to take care of its entire population in a way
Right.
that a business does not have to take care of
Sure.
its entire nation.
Yeah.
And so governments have to have a broader perspective, but businesses are often the innovators that can help governments to learn how to run their own units
That's it.
better.
Good point, yeah.
Rather than
Yeah.
the entire.
Rather than-
And that is difficult.
Yeah.
Because you get it into vision processes.
Yes.
You get into all sorts of. Yeah. Learning and open source and technology. Would that learning?
I think technology has its points for spreading information. I think it's less good for learning unless you have directed. But then it becomes less of a smart partnership in the sense that it becomes directed. So I can get 30 people into a room and hold a teleconference with them. But then there are the limitations of that teleconference when you get one person in Namibia, one person in South Africa, one person in Mozambique, and they're telecommunicating with somebody hosting because then that becomes much more directed, and then
Yeah.
you have a what do you want them to learn almost
That's it.
dynamically.
So you are forced to tell them what to learn,
which
and then
means
it's not
it
learning in itself.
decreases the potential.
The curiosity.
It doesn't eliminate it, but it decreases it. Well, if you go
It's
to
less dimensional then.
yeah,
Yeah.
and then when you're talking about like internet sources or online sites that claim they have everything you need to know about it, well, those are just collections of articles, collections of video clips. Well, that isn't learning. That's providing you with information that you may or may not learn with.
It's
And I
passive,
could
as
tell
you
you that
say.
it gives you a very
It's
cluttered
passive.
in tray.
It's
Yeah.
passive.
Yeah.
But no, but because you reflected on this, particularly in relation to policy,
Yeah,
because you wonder special advisors,
Yeah.
or chief science advisors, or anything else of that nature. Yeah. Why are they needed? What are they advising on? Because if there is an internet source,
Yeah.
which could be,
Well, one of the things they're
Webcast or
doing is
otherwise.
filtering the information.
well, one is to filter. But that in itself, how do you still have to adapt
You-
to the situation. And you don't have time, you know. If it's real time, if you are in university, then that's why you are there, because to reflect on it is great. So I can see more the role of universities coming in,
Yeah.
to be very frank,
Yeah.
yeah? But within the real-time situation, it becomes so immediacy,
Yeah.
such an immediacy and such a temptation to take action or to advise on what you have immediately at hand.
But isn't that
So,
because
in fact,
That gets into the structural issues that,
Yes.
that they're faced with, though, because once you have a governing situation and you're a chief scientific officer, if you have to, if something emerges, say, or Ebola,
Yeah.
you have to take what you've got and give it.
yes,
And so it's on the job learning or on the job training,
which is different.
which is very different.
from
Very, very good
reflective?
point.
Yeah,
Very, very different.
Yeah.
I mean, we've just
But
seen
not-
it with the
yeah,
Ebola
but
everywhere.
we don't get into Ebola.
No, but
That's
it's
a
the-
discussion,
the
but it's
way
an
it's been
example right
handled.
now.
yeah.
So advisors,
Advisors tend to, the biggest thing with advisors is that they tend to get into a structural
Advice.
position.
yeah,
And that structural position then, it structures the kind of advice that they look for, the kind of information they're looking for, and then the kind of advice they're going to be able to provide.
that's it.
And who they can provide it to. Because once you're into an embedded position, you might not be able to provide the advice you have to the people who need it.
Even if you have an immediate access
Even if you have
because of
immediate-
internet and everything
yeah.
else. Yeah, it's a very interesting situation because that is where we see in some of our contexts where that having a smart partnership hub, smart partners hub, within the or within the context of a government structure, yeah, which doesn't mean necessarily a physical
Yeah.
manifestation, means a group of. They are able at any time actually to connect with
Yeah.
and to advise in a much more considered.
As long as
And
they trust
reflective.
each other.
I
I mean, that's one of the key
yeah.
aspects is that
Yes,
the
yes,
hub
yes.
provides, it seems to me, is it
Mm,
provides
it
a
does,
situation
absolutely.
where you can trust each other rather than,
When
like on advice from the internet. You don't know if you can really trust it. I mean, so there's some,
Correct, how do-
like, you might want to go to like some medical site or a medical school
Or
site. But,
Wikipedia or whatever it
you know,
is.
you don't want to go to Wikipedia.
Okay, now why don't you want to go to Wikipedia? Let's hear him.
Well, I think
What do
Wikipedia,
you think?
Wikipedia has very good, it's very good at some things and very not good at other things. Like if you want the definition of something, you probably can get that on Wikipedia.
Yes.
But if you want to gain information and knowledge and build knowledge, it's much less good.
Yes.
And and Wikipedia has the limitations of who's building it and why they're doing what they're doing, because Wikipedia is political. People
Yeah,
put
that's-
information in there for a reason,
For a reason. That's right. Yeah.
and so you have to always if you're using it, you have to keep that in mind.
So if we are saying that when you were preoccupied a number of years ago,
Yeah.
but it's happening today with contemporary policy making,
Yeah.
this is what we're talking about.
Yeah,
In a way.
yeah,
It's not, it's the means and also the ability to probably,
Well, contemporary means it's ongoing, which means it's constantly changing.
okay.
I mean, what
okay.
I mean by contemporary is it's something that you have to be part of. You need to know something
current.
about its history.
Yeah.
Yeah, but it's something that's
You
ongoing.
need to have the pedigree.
Yeah, so
the-
that's why I think it's very difficult to talk about policy making processes, because
Yeah.
each policy follows a different process.
That's it. Has some particular roots, some particular
Exactly.
reasons.
So
Yeah.
sometimes it'll revisit this aspect, while other policies never have to do that. Sometimes it has to go through these channels, while other policies never do that. And so each one has its own genesis, and each one has its own route.
So
if you see what I
when you're
mean.
talking about policy, we'll need to finish in a moment because you need to catch the train.
Yes.
But the policy transfer,
Yeah.
therefore, that means learning from one another
Yeah.
in contemporary policy making and smart partnership, what?
It should be ongoing.
It should be ongoing.
It should be ongoing. I mean, that's why I think it's also hard to talk about a policy because, I mean, as you know, most policymakers don't, policy, at least writers don't talk about it anymore as a stop and go. It's you know, things just never end. Once it's in
Of the contemporary or current, or I don't know, maybe
Yeah,
I should
either
have
one
what
would
I
work
say,
with-
what I
yeah.
is that probably
For
we
me
won't be
anyway.
able to talk now, we'll talk probably 1st of December, if we can make it, the hub. There is even more so the ability, a perceived ability, but of trying to get rid of silos.
Yes.
And well, it is. a
Blair called it
perceived
joined up government.
It's a kind of joint up of a kind of smart government
Yeah.
or whatever. Now, in fact, it happens the reverse.
Yeah.
Because of the ability of actually being able to have access to internet, and in fact, I don't need to meet you.
No.
So there is a very this open source. And
Open source can lead to a contraction of learning.
Exactly. So
Open
I-
source can lead to a
that's it.
contraction of
That's
knowledge. Of
That's
it. In what
having
way?
lots of information together.
Yes.
But what
Yeah,
you
yeah.
do is instead of what you do is you find what you want to find.
Ah,
And
okay.
Yeah.
then once you find what
You
you
seek
want to
the thread.
find, you talk to who you want to talk to.
Yeah.
And
so
back
you
into the
become,
silo
Yeah.
again.
yeah, you
You've been
silo
driven
yourself again.
towards,
Yeah.
you become silo,
Yeah.
you become kind of, it's a very, very useful dimension
Yeah.
to be, there may be a number of others.
Yeah.
And finally, before you go, tell us your idea, and maybe we can make it, we put it on the record about the buckyball, or bucky
Oh,
ball.
I think these buckyballs with the world in front of it is an amazing thought.
So,
But I mean, the one thing I think you should do to adapt it is to put buckyballs in buckyballs, because
that's it.
really, when it comes right down to it, the outer ball is the hub, or the hubs, and they're the people that make up everything. But then within it, you're having ongoing communications within different
It's a very, very
areas.
Different
important
bucky
point.
balls.
Yeah.
Yeah. Then, might it have the same structure? Maybe not.
No, it'll change the
I
structure.
don't.
It actually changes.
It will change the
It
structure.
changes the
Absolutely.
nature of it completely.
But it'll be a series of buckyballs.
Well, you
Yeah.
may ask Manchester, the graphene professor, to think about it.
Okay.
on
They're
this
only
note.
two-dimensional,
Well,
aren't they?
this is Manchester. You've been to Manchester, isn't it?
Yes, I have been to
You've been to
Manchester.
Manchester University, isn't it? And
Yep.
now you are in Liverpool. But
I've never worked at Manchester, but
you didn't work
no,
at
no,
Manchester.
just Birmingham and
Okay.
Liverpool.
Okay, no, thank you very much. And it was really great to have you on the record, as it's called, although we don't have these records, simply to
They're in the space, in the
Okay.
ether, Michaela.
simply actually to bring in a little bit of
New perspective.
perspective, but it's curiosity for towards learning.
Okay.
So thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Yeah?